stroll across Madrid. Slow, ceremonial, heavy. You're standing in black among a sea of courtiers and soldiers, watching the coffin of Ferdinand VII roll past. No one is cheering. No one is weeping. The silence is not mourning. It's exhaustion. But Spain, as always, is not allowed to rest. Within weeks of his death, everything unravels. You hear it in the pounding of boots on cobblestones, in the frantic scribbling of pamphlets, in the hurried armings of noble households. The Carlist War is no longer a threat. It's an eruption, and at the root of it lies one question. Was Isabella truly the rightful queen? You remember her birth, how Ferdinand clutched her like a golden ticket to immortality, how he forced through the pragmatic sanction, rewriting centuries of law just to keep the crown away from his younger brother Carlos. But that decision, made out of fear, not principle, lights the match. Carlos declares himself king. His followers, the Carlists, launch a holy crusade to restore tradition, to erase Isabella, to undo Ferdinand's final act. And in this ideological chaos, Spain fractures. It's not just about a throne. It's about everything Ferdinand broke, because his reign left no strong institutions, no consensus, no peace. Only confusion, mistrust, and a child queen surrounded by regents and schemers. And so, for the next 40 years, the country becomes a revolving door of coups, rebellions, and civil wars. The monarchy becomes less a source of unity and more a chess piece in the endless brawl between conservatives and liberals, between future and past. And all of it can be traced back to Ferdinand himself. You hear historians whisper the same phrase over and over: a king without vision, a king consumed by self. He never led a war. He never drafted reforms. His only true cause was survival. And survival, for Ferdinand, meant obsession. Obsessed with control, with inheritance, with his image. You think back to those strange daily rituals, how he examined his food, reread old love letters, demanded his portraits be retouched to make his jaw stronger, his chest broader. There was never a Spain in his head, only himself in Spain. And when his body betrayed him, when his anatomy became a source of fear and mockery, that obsession deepened. His policies hardened, his heart closed. You hear whispers from court physicians who attended him late in life. They describe a man riddled with infection, sexually disfigured, barely able to stand, yet still demanding concubines, still mumbling about virility and legacy. Some say he ordered the construction of secret rooms, decorated with mirrors and velvet, where he could try to correct what nature had made wrong. Others say he wept after every failed attempt at intimacy. Historians still argue whether these rumors are real or exaggerated, whether his deformities were anatomical fact or just the gossip of a disgusted nobility. But in the end, it doesn't matter, because the impact, the fear, the cruelty, the paranoia was real. You look at Isabella, now queen, barely old enough to read, surrounded by men with swords and laws. She never asked for this crown. It is a curse, born not of destiny, but of one man's refusal to confront his demons. And still Ferdinand's defenders persist. They say he saved Spain from liberalism, that he preserved the monarchy during a storm of revolution, that he was a product of his time, cruel, yes, but necessarily so. They point to Napoleon, to France, to the dangers of modernity. But for every voice that defends him, 10 rise to condemn. They remember the purges, the secret police, the wives who died trying to give him sons, the court that whispered behind lace fans about the king's strange condition. They remember a Spain that could have emerged from the 19th century stronger, but instead limped into the 20th fractured, bitter, and war-weary. You stand at his grave, El Escorial, the royal pantheon, a cold stone slab beneath golden arches. No inscription speaks of love. No statue captures a moment of greatness. Only the name, Fernando VII, and beneath that, silence. No heirs line up behind him, just shadows and doubt. No reforms endure, only the wars he sparked. No admirers gather, only historians, shaking their heads and scribbling footnotes. You leave the tomb not with reverence, but relief, because the life of Ferdinand VII is not the story of a great king undone by tragedy. It is the story of a broken man who dragged an entire country into his mirror, into his fears, his lusts, his insecurities. A man who could not rule his body and so tried to rule everyone else instead. And the cost? Decades of instability, a monarchy tainted, a people left to pick through the ruins. That's the legacy. That's the consequence. That's Ferdinand VII. You return to the beginning, not the beginning of Spain, or monarchy, or empire, but to the private beginning of Ferdinand VII's reign. A throne inherited not from triumph, but from loss, confusion, and the trauma of a country betrayed. You're watching a prince become king under the strangest possible circumstances. In 1808, Spain is in chaos. Napoleon has invaded. Charles IV, Ferdinand's father, has abdicated. And Ferdinand, long mistrusted by both parents and ministers, is suddenly offered the crown like a poisoned gift. For a moment, he is beloved. The people call him El Deseado, the desired one. But the name ages poorly, because within weeks, Ferdinand is summoned to Bayonne. You follow him into the glittering halls of the French court. Massive chandeliers, velvet walls, the sneer of Napoleon Bonaparte. Ferdinand thinks he can negotiate, but he is young, uncertain, deeply insecure. His health has always been fragile, his body a source of quiet discomfort, his mind shaped by years of court surveillance and humiliation. Napoleon doesn't see a king. He sees a pawn, a soft-bodied, desperate boy. And so, without force, without war, the Spanish crown is tricked from his hands. Ferdinand signs away his throne. He spends the next 6 years in France, a royal prisoner in the Château de Valençay, dining under supervision, writing awkward letters to the emperor, obsessed with his own return. This is where the breakdown begins. Here, Ferdinand has time, too much time, to dwell on his own inadequacies, his appearance, his manhood, his legacy. His court physicians have long noted unusual malformations, reports never published, but whispered about in court circles. By his 20s, he is already consumed with fears about his reproductive health, unable to consummate his marriage with Princess Maria Antonia of Naples, whose own letters hint at confusion, shame, and physical agony, and she dies young, childless. And Ferdinand returns to Spain with more than a crown. He returns with a complex. When Napoleon falls in 1814, the Spanish people rejoice. Ferdinand VII is restored. Crowds cheer, bells ring. But inside the palace, the man is changed. The once hopeful prince is now a paranoiac king. He believes everyone is laughing at him. Ministers, ambassadors, servants. He shuns physical contact. He obsessively examines his food, his robes, his own reflection, and most tellingly, he obsesses over producing an heir. You hear him mutter it again and again. The king must not die alone. The king must not die mocked. It's not about love. It's about proof of manhood, of legitimacy, of God's favor. So he marries again. Twice. And both times, tragedy strikes. Maria Isabel of Portugal dies in childbirth. Then Maria Josepha Amalia of Saxony, barely 15 when they wed, recoils at their union. So much so that a bishop is called in to assure her it is holy for a wife to accept the king's advances. Even then, it takes years before the marriage is consummated. They too remain childless. This is the tragic core of his life. A man defined by what he cannot do. And with each failure, the cruelty deepens. You see it in the exiles, the executions, the censorship. You see it in the return of the Inquisition, the suppression of the Cortes, the arrests of students and journalists. Spain enters a dark tunnel, closed off from Europe, frozen in absolutism, led by a man who fears laughter more than rebellion. He walks the halls at night, servants say, speaking to portraits, sometimes naked, sometimes in tears. Other times, he demands parades and military reviews, shouting orders in an oversized uniform. But the final marriage, his fourth, is different. Maria Cristina of the Two Sicilies is young, clever, and above all else, fertile. Against all odds, she gives birth to a daughter, Isabella. The relief in court is seismic, but instead of calm, it brings fury. Because a daughter means a war. By changing the law to allow female succession, Ferdinand enrages his younger brother, Don Carlos, who claims the throne for himself. Spain is plunged into civil war, the Carlist wars that last generations. And that child, Isabella, will grow up not in celebration, but in constant threat. Her reign will be contested from the moment it begins. So what did Ferdinand achieve? He kept the crown, but at the cost of Spain itself. He fathered an heir, but only after decades of humiliation, coercion, and medical desperation. He ruled, but never governed, never reformed, never inspired. And as you step back from his final portrait, a stiff, pompous pose with a forced smirk and overstuffed military medals, you realize the deeper tragedy. This was a man ruled by shame, not by ambition, not by greatness, but by a crippling physical insecurity that poisoned every part of his reign, from the bedroom to the battlefield to the throne. A deformity kept secret by courtiers shaped the fate of a kingdom, and Spain would pay for it. Generation after generation, you